Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the 5 things the San Jose Sharks are hoping to find under the Christmas tree this Christmas morning. And probably the first thing they're hoping to open up is improved goaltending performance from one of Jones or Aaron Dell. Now, we have seen Dell in his past couple of starts actually look pretty solid, but then again, we've also seen Martin Jones this season have 3, 4, 5 straight starts where he's looked pretty good, and that hasn't really led to anything. He'd returned to his pretty substandard play, so I wouldn't necessarily have super high hopes for Aaron Dell. And so if the Sharks want any sort of chance of making the playoffs, they need some pretty consistent goaltending here. Yes, obviously the defense hasn't been great. Yes, the forward scoring could help maybe mask the goaltending issues like it did last season, but the fact of the matter is that the goaltending has not nearly been good enough. Both Martin Jones and Aaron Dell have had big struggles this season, and so if the Sharks want any chance like what the Blues did last season, they had a great performance from Jordan Binnington in the rest of the year, and the Sharks are going to need something like that from one of their 2 goaltenders. The second thing the Sharks are likely looking for is sort of pairs with the goaltending, is that they need more scoring, and that starts with the Sharks power play. Now, the Sharks penalty kill, even though it had struggled a bit near the start of December, it was maybe 3 straight games with 2 power play goals against in each of those games, but the penalty kill has still brought it back. It is still finding itself at the top of the league. The power play, on the other hand, has just been absolutely abysmal. It's in the bottom 5 of the league. It does have a couple of goals here in the month of December, but that's not nearly enough when we're coming up to the last couple of games that will find itself in this month. And so many people have said it already many times this season that, oh well, there's too much talent on this team to actually be able to keep them off the power play for this long. But when you're going on stretches where you're like 2 goals on 40 attempts here at a point, it's just mostly unacceptable. Something needs to change systematically, it seems, because personnel wise it doesn't seem like there's really many more options to attempt. But at the moment it just seems as though teams can actually just take penalties against the Sharks and use those 2 minutes as a bit of a breather, because the Sharks just don't really seem to get much generated at all. The third thing the Sharks are likely hoping to find under the Christmas tree is going to be also the scoring, but that will come from their depth. Yes, obviously the main guys haven't necessarily been fantastic this season, but Hertl has been pitching in for a lot of goals. Couture's maybe been the Sharks' best forwards this season. Kane hasn't looked great as of late, but he had that good start to it. Timo Meier has been quietly putting up some points here or there, even though he hasn't really been shining. But it's been a lot of the depth scoring, especially here under Bob Booner recently, that has been struggling. Goodrow hasn't been much of an effective force at all here in the past month or so. Marcus Sorensen will be something similar. We have seen a waiver pickup Stefan Nason actually look pretty decent here in his first couple of games as a Shark, so hopefully that can continue. But the Sharks are definitely going to need something from this bottom 6. Patrick Marleau is obviously a big one. I don't think he has a point in his last dozen or so games this year after he actually started off pretty well with the Sharks. So not only does the power play need to get rolling, but at even strength, some of that depth scoring still needs to show up. Fourth thing to talk about, and maybe a bit more specifically, would be the performance of Brent Burns. Now, he'd been such a huge factor for the San Jose Sharks in the past few seasons. He led the team in points in the 16-17 season, the 17-18 season, and the 18-19 season. And in that 18-19 season, he had 83 points in the 82 games he's played. And yet this season, it has taken a big step back. He's only on pace for around 50 to 60 points, which is pretty not that great for someone like Brent Burns, even if it's pretty good for most other defensemen in the NHL. And it hasn't necessarily been, Burns' age showing necessarily. He turns 35 in about March, but it hasn't necessarily been something where you can tell his speed is not really keeping up. It just seems like he's making more boneheaded defensive errors than he's been making in the past. Nobody has really praised ever Brent Burns for being a great defensive defenseman, but he's normally been someone who could be counted on to be quite solid. Peter DeBoer obviously played him a lot in some pretty tough situations, and so he would occasionally make some really bad plays that would definitely stick out, but I didn't think it was anything sort of consistent. But this season, especially after the first 15 or so games where he was pretty decent, it has just been mostly awful almost every single game. Now, I will say Burns has looked better in the past couple, but the Sharks are going to need a much better season moving forward from potentially their best defender, depending on how you compare him to Erik Karlsson. And now the final gift that they're hoping to find under the tree this holiday season is probably the most important one, and that is a bit of Christmas magic. The Sharks right now sit at 34 points. They are 9 points out of a playoff spot in the Western Conference. They don't necessarily have any sort of games in hand on anybody. And so when you take a look at what the correct point total would likely be to make the playoffs in the Western Conference this season, it would probably be somewhere around 95-ish points, which means the Sharks would have to pick up 61 points in their last 44 games on the year, which could entail something like a record of maybe 30, 13-1, maybe 29, 13-3, something like that, which would be an insane pace. If they were on that sort of pace at the moment, they would be among a top 3 team in the NHL. So it's going to be very, very difficult for that to come out, especially considering how we've seen the Sharks look in the first 38 games. It doesn't seem like it's very possible, but as I said, it would be a Christmas miracle at this point if the Sharks could make a run for the playoffs, and we'll see if it can happen. Merry Christmas and class dismissed.